A real estate millionaire stops at a gas station in a poor neighborhood when a little girl approaches desperately and begs, "Sir, please buy my house. I really need money." Intrigued, he follows her to a deteriorated wooden shack. The girl takes a rusty key, lifts it with her two small hands, and with tears in her eyes, repeats the request, "Please, buy my house." When he questions the child about why she wants the money from the house, she invites him to come in. He hesitates, but ends up following her. What he finds inside makes him break down in tears, leaving him deeply shaken. The suffocating afternoon heat made the asphalt shimmer like a mirage, and Robert Mendoza adjusted the AC in his Mercedes for the third time in 5 minutes. At 45, he had built a real estate empire worth over $50 million. But at that moment, lost in a part of the county he'd never imagined setting foot in, he felt completely out of his element. The GPS had failed miles back, and the fuel tank was dangerously low. When he spotted the gas station, a single, weathered structure that contrasted starkly with the sleek establishments he frequented, Robert sighed with relief. He parked by the pump, watching with discomfort as children played barefoot on the dirt road, their voices echoing between the modest houses that dotted the horizon. Robert had always avoided places like this. Not out of prejudice, he justified to himself, but for practicality. His life was organized, predictable, controlled. Meetings in climate-controlled offices, lunches at fine dining restaurants, deals that moved millions. Here, surrounded by the dust clinging to his Italian suit and the smell of sweat mixed with diesel, he felt like an intruder. While the attendant filled his tank, Robert checked his emails, trying to maintain the routine that calmed him. A purchase offer for a lot downtown, another meeting with investors, numbers dancing on the screen in a language he commanded perfectly. The real world, the one he knew and controlled, was still just a few taps away. That's when he saw her. A girl of about 8 was running toward him, her bare feet kicking up small clouds of dust. Her clothes were worn but clean, and there was something in her eyes, an urgency, a desperation, that made Robert look up from his phone for the first time since he'd arrived. The child stopped before him, breathless, her small hands clutching the hem of his dress shirt as if it were a life raft. Her brown eyes shone with unshed tears, and when she spoke, her voice trembled with an emotion Robert couldn't quite decipher. "Mister, please, buy my house." Robert blinked, certain he'd misheard. He slipped the phone into his pocket and knelt to her level, studying her small, determined face. There was something in her expression that unsettled him. Immaturity that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "I'm sorry, what was that?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. "I really need the money." The girl gripped his sleeve tighter, and Robert could feel the desperation radiating from her like heat. "You work with houses, right? I saw your fancy car, and the man at the station said you're one of those rich men who buys houses." Robert glanced around, realizing he had indeed drawn attention. A few residents watched from a distance, curious but respectful. The attendant had finished with the gas and was waiting for payment, pretending not to listen. "Listen, kid, Robert began, but the girl cut him off. "Please, mister, my house isn't very big, but it's mine, and I need the money to save my little brother." The tears finally began to fall, leaving clean trails on her dusty cheeks. "He's really sick, and I don't know what else to do." Something stirred in Robert's chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. He tried to push it away, as he always did when emotions threatened his rationality, but the image of the desperate girl seemed to have cracked his carefully built defenses. "Where is this house?" he asked, surprising himself. The girl's eyes lit up with a hope that made Robert's heart pound uncomfortably. "You'll really come see my house?" Robert nodded, not fully understanding why he was agreeing to follow a strange child to a place that surely wasn't on any map he knew. The girl, whose name he learned was Sophia, led Robert through increasingly narrow streets, where asphalt gave way to packed dirt and the few brick houses turned into precarious structures of scrap wood and tin. With every step, the mogul felt more distant from his familiar world, as if crossing an invisible border between two entirely different realities. "My little brother's name is Miguel," she said, glancing back as she walked with hurried steps. "He's 5, but he's really smart. Before he got sick, he could count to 100 and was already learning to read." Robert noted the pride in her voice, the way her eyes shone when she spoke of her brother. There was something touching in the way such a small child had taken on the role of protector, carrying burdens that should belong to adults. "And your parents?" Robert asked, trying to sound casual, though the question felt heavy on his tongue. Sophia stopped for a moment, her small fists clenching. "They went to heaven last year, a car accident on their way home from work." Her voice was flat, as if reciting a memorized lesson, but Robert caught the almost imperceptible tremor. "It's been just me taking care of Miguel since then." The silence that followed was heavy. Robert felt a tightness in his chest, an uncomfortable sensation that reminded him of emotions he had long since buried. He tried to push the thoughts away, focusing on the present, but blurred images of his own childhood insisted on appearing at the edge of his consciousness. They kept walking, and Robert observed the gradual transformation of the neighborhood. The houses grew smaller, simpler, some clearly built with repurposed materials. Children played in the street, their laughter echoing between the modest structures, creating an atmosphere of community he hadn't experienced in decades. "Mister, do you have kids?" Sophia asked suddenly, her childish curiosity breaking the silence. The question hit Robert like a punch to the gut. "No," he replied, his tone sharper than he'd intended. "Never had time for family." "Oh." Sophia processed the information with the gravity of an adult. "It must be lonely, being rich, all by yourself." The girl's innocent observation caught him off guard. Robert had built his entire life around financial success, convincing himself he needed nothing more. Relationships were complications. Emotional ties were vulnerabilities to be exploited. But hearing it from the mouth of an 8-year-old, stated with such simplicity, made something stir deep inside him. "That's our house." Sophia pointed to a structure that made Robert stop in his tracks. What she called a house was little more than a shack. Mismatched wooden planks formed the walls, some clearly taken from discarded crates or pallets. The corrugated tin roof was rusted through in several spots, and the entire structure seemed to defy the laws of physics by remaining upright. A small door, painted a faded blue, hung slightly crooked on its rusty hinges. Robert swallowed hard. In his business, he dealt with properties worth millions, luxury condos with ocean views, houses in gated communities with every imaginable amenity. This precarious structure wouldn't even qualify as a storage shed in his developments. "It's small, I know," Sophia said, misinterpreting his expression. "But it's ours. My dad built it with his own hands when I was a baby. He always said it doesn't matter how big the house is, but how much love fits inside." The girl's words echoed in Robert's mind, creating a painful contrast with his empty 12-bedroom mansion, where he had lived alone for years. All that opulence, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd truly felt at home. Sophia pulled a small, rusty key from her pocket, holding it with both hands as if it were a treasure. Her eyes filled with tears again as she turned to him, and Robert saw all the vulnerability she tried to hide behind her courage. "Please, mister," she whispered, her voice breaking, "buy my house. I promise it's worth something." Robert looked at the key in the girl's trembling hands, Then at the shack she called home and felt something fundamental shatter within him. He hesitated on the threshold, his Italian leather shoes contrasting starkly with the packed dirt floor. The inside of the shack was even more shocking than its exterior. A single room served as living room, bedroom, and kitchen, with imaginary divisions created by old curtains hung from makeshift clotheslines. Sunlight filtered through the cracks between the planks, creating golden beams that danced in the dusty air. In the most sheltered corner, away from the leaks that dripped into buckets scattered on the floor, was a thin mattress covered with carefully laundered sheets, though patched in several places. That's when Robert saw him. Miguel was lying on the mattress, so small he almost disappeared among the blankets. His small face had the frightening pallor of illness, and his breathing was labored, each breath seeming to require a conscious effort, even in his sleep. His furrowed brow suggested constant discomfort. "Miguel," Sophia whispered, kneeling beside her brother, "I brought a visitor." The boy opened his eyes slowly, and Robert felt as if he'd been struck in the chest. Those eyes were immense in his thin face, shining with a fever that didn't seem to break. When Miguel managed a weak smile for his sister, Robert had to lean against the wall to keep from staggering. "Hi, Sophie." The boy's voice was a hoarse whisper. Did you do it?" "I did, sweetie. This man here is going to help us." Sophia stroked her brother's hair with a tenderness that made Robert's heart ache. "He's going to buy our house, and you're going to get better." Miguel turned his eyes to Robert, studying him with the peculiar seriousness of sick children who mature too quickly. "Are you rich?" he asked, with innocent curiosity. Robert crouched down, getting to the level of the makeshift bed. "Why do you ask?" "Because Sophie said only very rich people can pay for me to get better." Miguel tried to sit up, but weakness prevented him. Sophia immediately helped, arranging the pillows behind his back. "I have a disease with a hard name. The doctor at the clinic said it's very expensive to cure." Robert swallowed hard. "What kind of disease?" Sophia opened a plastic bag next to the bed, pulling out crumpled papers and prescriptions. "They call it..." Wait. She unfolded a paper and read with difficulty, "Cystic fibrosis." The doctor explained that Miguel's lungs don't work right, and he needs special medicines and treatments that cost a lot of money. The words echoed in the shack like a ghost from the past. Robert felt the world spin. Memories he had locked away for decades, forcing their way through his carefully constructed defenses. Cystic fibrosis. The same diagnosis that had taken his younger brother, Edward, at the age of 7. "Mister, are you okay?" Sophia touched his arm, worried by his sudden pallor. Robert blinked, forcing himself back to the present. I'm fine." But he wasn't. The memories came in waves. Edward gasping for breath in a hospital bed, his desperate parents selling everything they owned, the powerlessness of a poor family facing a disease too expensive to cure. "The medicine we can get from the clinic doesn't work," Sophia continued, showing him empty vials. "And the ones that do cost more than $1,000 a month. I tried asking for money on the street, but in 6 months, I only got $40. Miguel coughed violently, a wet, rattling sound that reminded Robert of sleepless nights listening to Edward struggle to breathe. Sophia rushed to get a cloth and helped her brother clean his mouth, her movements precise, like someone who had become an expert in basic medical care. "That's why I need to sell our house," Sophia said, turning her attention back to Robert. "I know it's not very pretty, but it's ours, and if it can save Miguel, then it's worth any price." Robert looked around again, calculating mentally. The shack, in its current state, might be worth $500 in scrap materials. The land it stood on probably wasn't even legally documented. The children's entire estate wouldn't pay for a week of proper treatment. "Sophia," he said gently, "do you know how much your brother's treatment costs?" She shook her head, her large eyes fixed on him. The doctor said it was very expensive, but she didn't say how much. Why, mister, isn't our house worth enough? Robert closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of a decision that would change everything. When he opened them again, he saw Miguel trying to sit up, his feverish eyes filled with a heartbreaking hope. Robert left the shack abruptly, muttering an excuse about needing to make a call. The stuffy afternoon air seemed insufficient to fill his lungs as he leaned against a scraggly tree, trying to control the avalanche of emotions that threatened to destroy decades of carefully constructed self-control. His hands trembled as he pulled his phone from his pocket, but instead of making a call, he just stared at the blank screen. In its reflective surface, he saw the face of a successful 45-year-old man, but behind his own eyes, he recognized the 12-year-old boy who had been forced to grow up too fast. Edward. The name he hadn't spoken in over 3 decades echoed in his mind like a muffled scream. His younger brother, with his golden curls and mischievous smile, who had left a void that Robert had filled with work, money, and an iron-clad determination to never again allow himself to love someone enough to suffer that way again. The house where they grew up wasn't much better than Sophia and Miguel's shack. 3 tiny rooms in a rundown neighborhood on the south side, where his mother cleaned houses and his father worked construction. When Edward was diagnosed, the entire family mobilized in a desperate fight against time and a lack of resources. Robert remembered the nights he lay awake listening to Edward cough, the desperation of watching his parents sell everything they had, the old radio, their wedding rings, even the few pieces of furniture. He remembered begging on the streets after school, lying about his age to get jobs a 12-year-old shouldn't be doing, all in the impossible hope of scraping together enough money to save his brother. "Mister," Sophia's soft voice brought him back to the present. She had come out of the shack and was watching him with concern. "You're crying." Robert quickly wiped his face, trying to hide the tears he hadn't realized were falling. "I'm fine. It's just the bright sun." Sophia came closer and, without asking, took his large hand in her small, calloused ones. "You lost someone too, didn't you?" The simple question, asked with the precocious wisdom of one who knows pain, completely shattered Robert's defenses. He knelt on the dirt, bringing himself to the girl's level, and for the first time in decades, he allowed someone to see his vulnerability. "My brother," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "He had the same sickness as Miguel. I was just a little older than you when we couldn't save him." Sophia hugged him, her thin arms wrapping around his neck with surprising strength. "That's why you came with me," she murmured against his shoulder. "Because you understand." Robert closed his eyes, allowing himself to feel the child's embrace, a genuine human connection he had avoided for so long. For a moment, he wasn't the successful businessman, the man everyone feared in negotiations. He was just Robert, the boy who had lost his brother and sworn never to love again. "Sophia," he said when they finally separated, "Miguel's treatment, it's very expensive, more than your house, more than anything you have." The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she kept her chin up. "So there's no hope. Is the same thing going to happen to him that happened to your brother?" The question cut like a blade. Robert looked at the shack, imagining Miguel inside, struggling to breathe, and felt something crystallize in his chest. A determination unlike anything he had felt in business, more powerful than ambition, more urgent than profit. "No," he said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "No, Sophia, this time will be different." "How?" she asked, clinging to the hope like a child to a beloved toy. Robert stood up, brushing the dust from the knees of his expensive pants. For the first time since arriving in this place, he felt in control, but it was a different kind of control. It wasn't about dominating or manipulating, it was about using his power for something that truly mattered. Because this time, he said, looking directly into Sophia's eyes, this time I have the resources to actually fight. The next morning, Robert returned to the neighborhood with a determination he hadn't felt in years. He had spent the entire night researching cystic fibrosis, contacting medical specialists, and calculating costs. What he discovered was both hopeful and daunting. The treatment was possible, but it would cost approximately $2 million. Sophia was waiting for him at the door of the shack, as if she knew he would be back. Her eyes shone with a mixture of hope and fear, like someone who doesn't want to be disappointed again, but can't help but believe. "How's Miguel?" was Robert's first question. "Worse," Sophia answered honestly. "He coughed all night. And this morning he couldn't even sit up to drink water." Robert felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the urgency he had learned to recognize when time becomes the enemy. "We're taking him to the hospital. Now." "But mister, we don't have money for a private hospital, and at the public one—" "I do," Robert interrupted her gently. "Trust me." The drive to the Harrison Medical Center, the most renowned hospital in the state, was a silent torture. Miguel was conscious but clearly fragile, leaning back in the Mercedes as Sophia held his hand, whispering words of encouragement that sounded like prayers. Robert watched them in the rearview mirror, and each of Miguel's difficult breaths echoed in his memory as a painful reminder of Edward. But this time would be different. This time he wasn't a helpless boy watching a tragedy unfold. At the hospital, the change was immediate. The Mendoza name opened doors that remained closed to families like Sophia's. Within minutes, Miguel was being examined by a team of specialists led by Dr. Henry Wallace, an internationally recognized pediatric pulmonologist. "The situation is critical," Dr. Wallace explained after 2 hours of tests. "The cystic fibrosis is in an advanced stage, but there is still hope. There are new treatments, medications that can significantly reverse the lung damage." "What's the cost?" Robert asked directly. "For a full course of treatment, including medication, specialized physical therapy, continuous monitoring, and potential procedures, approximately $2 million over the next 3 years. Sophia paled at the figure, but Robert simply nodded. "When can we start?" "There's a problem," Dr. Wallace continued, looking uncomfortable. "This treatment isn't covered by public aid, and to begin privately, we need complete documentation for the children, legal guardians, medical history. They're orphans," Robert explained. "Then we have to involve child protective services, social workers, a whole series of bureaucratic protocols that could take weeks or even months to resolve." Robert felt frustration build in his chest. He had discovered that money, his most powerful tool, was not enough when faced with the bureaucracy and legal complexities of a situation like this. "Doctor," he said, controlling his tone, "this boy doesn't have weeks. You said yourself his condition is critical." "I understand, Mr. Mendoza, but my hands are tied. I can admit Miguel to stabilize him, provide respiratory support, but to start the definitive treatment—" "How long does he have without it?" Sophia asked with a courage that broke Robert's heart. "Doctor," Wallace hesitated before answering, "with the basic care we can provide, perhaps a few weeks." The ensuing silence was deafening. Robert looked at Sophia, who held her sleeping brother's hand, and saw the world's determination in an 8-year-old's eyes. He also saw a reflection of himself decades ago, powerless before a situation that money couldn't solve immediately. "Then we'll solve the bureaucracy," Robert said, his voice charged with determination. I'll hire the best lawyers, expedite every process. Mr. Mendoza, Dr. Wallace called as he stood to leave. May I ask what your relationship is to these children? Robert paused, looking at Sophia and Miguel. Technically, they were strangers he had met less than 24 hours ago, but when he looked at these two small human beings fighting against the odds, he saw family. They are, he began, then stopped and restarted more firmly. They are my responsibility now. A week had passed since Robert had committed to helping Sophia and Miguel. The boy was stable in the hospital, breathing with the help of modern equipment, but still awaiting the bureaucratic clearance to begin his definitive treatment. Robert had hired 3 different law firms to speed up the legal processes, but the bureaucratic machine moved with frustrating slowness. It was during one of his daily hospital visits that Robert noticed the stares. Nurses whispered as he walked the halls. Administrative staff exchanged low-voiced comments. Initially, he attributed it to being a public figure, but something about the quality of those looks bothered him. The truth came to light when Mrs. Gable, one of Sophia's neighbors, approached him at the hospital entrance. She was a middle-aged woman, with deep wrinkles carved by years of hard work and constant worry. Mr. Mendoza, she said, blocking his path with determination, I need to speak with you. Robert stopped, recognizing the seriousness in her voice. Yes, Mrs. Gable. I live 3 houses down from Sophia. She looked around nervously before continuing. You need to know. They're spreading rumors about you in the neighborhood. What kind of rumors? Robert felt a chill. And they're saying you're taking advantage of the kids, that no rich man would do this out of kindness. Mrs. Gable lowered her voice. Some people called Child Protective Services, saying it's suspicious for a stranger to show up out of nowhere and want to help orphan children. Robert felt the world spin. In his entire career, he had faced down ruthless competitors, sabotage attempts, and business-related smear campaigns. But he had never imagined defending himself against accusations involving children. Mrs. Gable, I just want to help. Miguel is dying, and I have the resources to save him. I know that, she said quickly. I see how you look at those kids. It's the same look a father has for his children, but not everyone understands that. That afternoon, the situation grew even more complicated. Robert was in Miguel's room, reading an adventure book he'd bought for the boy, when 2 social workers entered, accompanied by a representative from CPS. Mr. Mendoza, the older woman said, presenting her credentials. I'm Dr. Helena Costa from Child Protective Services. We need to talk. Sophia, who was arranging flowers she had brought for her brother, tensed immediately. Robert saw the fear in her eyes and tried to convey calm with a forced smile. We've received several anonymous reports concerning your relationship with these children, Dr. Costa continued. It's protocol to investigate any situation that could place minors at risk. What kind of reports? Robert asked, keeping his voice calm despite the anger rising within him. Allegations that you might be taking advantage of the vulnerability of orphan children for questionable purposes. Sophia shot up, her eyes blazing with indignation. That's a lie. Mr. Robert is the only person who cared about us. He's saving my brother's life. Sophia, please, Robert said gently, but she didn't stop. You weren't here when Miguel was dying in the shack. You didn't care when I begged for help at the clinic. But now that someone is finally helping us, you come here with these horrible lies. The girl's tears of outrage moved even the social workers, who exchanged uncomfortable glances. Miguel, despite his weakness, tried to sit up in bed. Mr. Robert is good, he said, his voice faint but determined. He brought me books and promised I'd get better. Dr. Costa sighed, clearly torn between protocol and the evidence before her. Mr. Mendoza, I understand your intentions may be noble, but we must follow procedure. The children will need to be interviewed separately, and their legal situation must be regularized before we can allow you to continue as their temporary guardian. How long will that take? Robert asked, feeling the urgency press on his chest. A few weeks, perhaps months. Months, Sophia cried out. Miguel doesn't have months. The silence that followed was charged with tension. Robert looked at Miguel, pale in the hospital bed, then at Sophia, who was trembling with fear and anger. He realized he was fighting a battle money couldn't win, bureaucracy fueled by suspicion and prejudice. For a terrifying moment, he imagined Miguel wasting away while paperwork dragged on, and he felt the same despair he had experienced at 12 years old. Robert was in his office trying to coordinate a legal strategy to accelerate the processes when his executive assistant, Maria, entered with a worried expression. She was carrying a folder and hesitated to approach, as if bearing bad news. Mr. Mendoza, this came in the mail today, she said, holding out an envelope with no return address. And Dr. Wallace is online too. He said it's urgent. Robert tore open the envelope while picking up the phone, but what he found inside made him completely forget the call. They were photographs of him with Sophia and Miguel, taken from various angles over the past week, entering the hospital, talking with the children, hugging Sophia when she cried. Tucked in with the photos was a typed note. Wealthy man preying on vulnerable children. What kind of interest do you really have in them? Dr. Wallace. Robert answered the phone, his voice tense. Robert, I need to tell you something important. I just found out someone has been asking questions about you here at the hospital. A well-dressed man claimed to be an investigative journalist. He wanted details about your relationship with the children, how much money you're spending, if there was anything suspicious about your behavior. Robert's blood ran cold. What kind of questions? Specifically, targeted questions, as if he already knew the answers and just wanted confirmation. He asked about your daily visits, about you sleeping at the hospital some nights when Miguel was in crisis. He implied there was something unnatural about a single man getting so involved with orphan children. Did you say anything? Of course not. But Robert, this is organized. This isn't random neighborhood gossip. Someone is systematically investigating you. Robert hung up, his mind racing. The photographs, the journalist, the rumors. It was all connected. Someone wanted to destroy his reputation, and they had chosen the most devastating way possible, attacking him through his attempt to help vulnerable children. His first suspicion fell on business rivals. He had a few enemies in real estate who wouldn't hesitate to use dirty tactics. But then Maria entered again, her face now pale. Mr. Mendoza, Mr. Arthur Vance is here. He says he needs to speak with you urgently. Arthur Vance had been his partner for over a decade, the man he trusted most in business. Robert had known him since he was still building his empire, and Arthur had been instrumental in several of the company's major expansions. Robert! Arthur walked into the office with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We need to talk about this situation with the children. What situation? Robert asked, but something in Arthur's tone put him on high alert. Come on, Robert, you can't be naive. A man in your position, getting involved with orphans like this, it's causing talk that could affect our business. Robert studied his partner's face, searching for a sign of their years of friendship, but found only cold calculation. What kind of talk? Investors are concerned. Some key clients are questioning whether they want to be associated with our name. There are rumors you might be under investigation. And you believe these rumors? Robert asked directly. Arthur hesitated for a fraction of a second, but it was long enough for Robert to see the truth. It's not about what I believe, Robert. It's about business. Perception is reality in our world. In that moment, Robert understood. The pieces clicked into place with painful clarity. Arthur had always coveted total control of the company. He had watched Robert pull back from business to focus on the children and saw an opportunity. The investigative journalist, the photographs, even some of the neighborhood rumors, all orchestrated by someone with resources and motive. "It was you," Robert said, more a statement than a question. "Me." Arthur feigned surprise, but his eyes glinted with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Robert, you're being paranoid." "I'm just suggesting you step away from this situation before it does irreparable damage to the company. You're trying to destroy me using sick children. I'm protecting our investments from your recent eccentricities." Arthur stood up, abandoning the pretense of friendship entirely. "You've changed, Robert. You're emotional, irrational. That's not good for business." "Get out of my office," Robert said in a dangerously quiet voice. "Our office," Arthur corrected. "Or have you forgotten we're partners? And as your partner, I'm considering calling a board meeting to discuss your fitness to continue as CEO." After Arthur left, Robert was alone with the devastating realization that he wasn't just fighting bureaucracy and prejudice. He was facing a calculated betrayal by someone he had considered family, someone willing to use the lives of two innocent children as pawns in a power game. The phone rang. It was Sophia, her small, frightened voice on the other end. "Mr. Robert, more people came to the hospital. They're saying they might have to take us to different places." Robert raced to the hospital as if his own life depended on it. On the way, he called his lawyers, demanding they mobilize every available resource to block any attempt to separate Sophia and Miguel. His mind worked furiously, calculating moves and counter-moves, as in a chess game where the pieces were human lives. When he reached Miguel's room, he found a scene that stopped him at the door. Sophia was sitting on the edge of her brother's bed, holding his small hand, quietly humming a song Robert recognized from his own childhood. It was a lullaby his own mother used to sing to Edward on difficult nights. "Mr. Robert!" Sophia ran to him as soon as she saw him, hugging him with desperate force. "They said they might have to separate us, that I might have to go to one home and Miguel to another." Robert knelt and held the girl's shoulders, looking directly into her eyes. "Sophia, listen to me very carefully. I will not let that happen. I promise you." "But how can you promise? They're the government. They have the power to—" "And I have resources, Sophia. I have lawyers. I have influence. And more important than any of that, I have something they didn't count on. I actually care about you." Miguel, who had been dozing, opened his eyes and smiled weakly. "Mr. Robert, are you going to be our real dad?" The question, asked with the devastating innocence of a sick child, struck Robert like a bolt of lightning. He looked at the pale little face, at Sophia with her large, hopeful eyes, and felt something solidify in his chest. A certainty that went beyond any business decision he had ever made. "If you'll have me," he said simply, "I'd love to be—" Sophia's tears were immediate, but this time they were tears of relief and joy. She hugged him again, and Robert felt as if a part of himself that had been frozen for decades was finally beginning to thaw. "But first," he said, trying to keep his tone optimistic, "we have some boring adult stuff to take care of, okay?" Over the next few hours, Robert coordinated an operation that rivaled his biggest corporate deals. His lawyers worked to expedite the adoption process, while he mobilized contacts in the state government to fast-track the medical approvals needed to start Miguel's treatment. The afternoon brought unexpected news. Dr. Wallace had found a legal loophole. A new experimental protocol allowed for treatment to begin in cases of medical emergency, with retroactive approval from regulatory bodies. "We can start tomorrow," the doctor said, "but there are risks. If the state agencies don't approve it retroactively, you could face serious legal complications." "What are the chances of the treatment succeeding?" Robert asked. "If we start immediately, 80%. If we wait another 2 weeks, maybe 50. Robert didn't hesitate. "Start tomorrow." Meanwhile, Sophia was showing a maturity that continued to astound him. During a conversation with the hospital's psychologist, she defended Robert with an eloquence that touched everyone present. "You want to know if he's a good person," Sophia said. "He cries when he thinks no one is looking. He cries because he remembers the brother he lost. He's not here because he wants something from us. He's here because we remind him of who he was before he got rich and forgot what it's like to need help." The psychologist, Dr. Amanda Rice, was visibly moved. Later, she called Robert aside. "Mr. Mendoza, I rarely see such a genuine connection between an adult and children in this situation. Sophia sees you as a real father figure, not a temporary savior. And I see them as the children I never thought I could have," Robert admitted. "There's something else you should know," Dr. Rice continued. "Sophia has been researching her brother's illness. She knows exactly what's at stake. She knows the risks, the costs, the odds. That little girl made a conscious decision to entrust her life and her brother's to you." When night fell, Robert found himself doing something he hadn't done in decades: praying. Not in a church or following specific rituals, but simply talking to whatever higher power might be listening, asking for the strength to protect these 2 children who, in less than 2 weeks, had become the center of his universe. "Mr. Robert," Sophia's soft voice interrupted him. She was standing at the door, holding a drawing. "What's that, Princess?" "It's our family," she said, showing him a drawing of 3 figures holding hands. "You, me, and Miguel. When he gets better, we're going to be a real family, right?" Robert looked at the drawing, then at the girl who had drawn it, and felt a peace he hadn't experienced since childhood. The first day of Miguel's treatment was like watching a miracle in slow motion. Robert arrived at the hospital before dawn to find Sophia already awake, carefully arranging her brother's few belongings. She had brought a worn teddy bear, the only toy left from their previous life. "It's been his since he was a baby," she explained, noticing Robert's gaze. "Mom said that as long as he had Toby, he'd never be alone." Dr. Wallace arrived with a team of 6 specialists, transforming Miguel's room into a mini ICU. The new drugs arrived in special thermal containers, each vial worth more than many families' annual salary. "Miguel," Dr. Wallace knelt by the bed, "we're going to start a special treatment today. You might feel a little sick at first, but that's a sign the medicine is working." Miguel nodded seriously, holding Sophia's hand. "Will it hurt?" "A little," the doctor said honestly, "but Sophia and Mr. Robert will be right here with you the whole time." The first few hours were tense. Miguel was sick twice, and his temperature fluctuated dangerously. Sophia never left his side, holding his hand and whispering stories she made up on the spot. Robert was amazed by the girl's strength, turning her own fear into courage to comfort Miguel. "Once upon a time, there was a very brave prince who lived in a magic castle," Sophia narrated, "and he had a sister who knew how to make potions that could cure any sickness." Around noon, something shifted. Miguel managed to keep the medication down, and his breathing, which for weeks had been so labored, began to even out. "Doctor." Wallace checked the monitors with growing optimism. "His vitals are stabilizing," he murmured to Robert. "It's too early to celebrate, but it's promising." Meanwhile, Robert was fighting battles on other fronts. Arthur had successfully called an emergency board meeting for the following week, claiming Robert was mentally unstable and a risk to the company. The tabloids had begun publishing insinuations about a suspicious millionaire and orphan children, but Robert discovered he wasn't fighting alone. Maria, his assistant, had started documenting all of Arthur's suspicious activities. Dr. Rice, the hospital psychologist, offered to testify about the genuine bond between Robert and the children. Even Mrs. Gable, Sophia's neighbor, had organized a petition in the neighborhood defending Robert. "What, you've changed our community," she said when she came to visit Miguel. "After you showed up, other people started paying attention to us. A church donated medicine to the clinic. A company offered jobs to some of the unemployed parents." In the afternoon, Miguel managed to sit up in bed for the first time in weeks. His face was still pale, but there was a new light in his eyes that made Robert's heart leap with hope. "Mr. Robert," Miguel said, his voice stronger, "when I get better, will you teach me how to drive fancy cars like yours?" Robert laughed, feeling tears of relief burn his eyes. "I'll teach you anything you want to learn, champ." Sophia came close and whispered in Robert's ear, "He couldn't sit up 3 weeks ago. The medicine is working, isn't it?" "It is, princess. It's working." That night, as Miguel slept peacefully for the first time in months, Sophia asked a question that caught Robert completely off guard. "Mr. Robert, were you ever happy before you met us?" Robert considered the question carefully. He'd had success, achievements, recognition. He had a luxurious house, expensive cars, a robust bank account, but happiness? No, he admitted. "I thought I was happy, but I was just busy. It's different." "And now?" Robert looked at Miguel, sleeping peacefully. Then at Sophia with her eyes that were far too wise for her age. "Now I know what real happiness is." Sophia smiled and snuggled into the armchair beside the bed, her head resting on Robert's shoulder. "Me too. Even with all this mess, even with Miguel being sick, I feel safer than I have since our parents went to heaven." Outside, the rain began to fall, but inside the hospital room, 3 people who had found each other by chance were building something that no storm could ever destroy. 3 weeks had passed since the treatment began, and Miguel was showing remarkable improvement. He could sit up for longer periods, his cough had significantly diminished, and for the first time in months, his temperature remained stable. But it was during a routine visit that Robert discovered something that left him utterly baffled. Sophia was organizing an old shoebox when Robert arrived at the room. Curiously, she hid it as soon as she saw him enter, a behavior completely out of character for a girl who had always been transparent with him. "What do you have there, princess?" he asked curiously. Sophia hesitated, exchanging a look with Miguel, who was awake and more alert than ever. There seemed to be a silent communication between the siblings, as if they shared a secret. It's just some of my stuff," she mumbled unconvincingly. Robert sat on the edge of the bed, adopting the gentle tone he had learned to use with them. "Sophia, you know you can trust me, right? If something is bothering you..." Miguel intervened, his voice still weak but determined. "Show him, Sophie, he needs to know." Reluctantly, Sophia opened the box. Inside were dozens of crumpled papers, printouts from a library computer, handwritten notes in a careful script, and even photos taken with an old cell phone. Robert picked up a few of the papers and began to read. They were medical research on cystic fibrosis, printed from specialized websites, tables of symptoms, disease progression, treatment types, but what struck him most were the detailed notes in Sophia's neat handwriting. Date, March 15th. Miguel coughed up blood twice. Respiration, 28 per minute at rest. Temp, 100.1 degrees F. Date, March 22. Was able to play for 10 minutes before getting tired. ate half his oatmeal. Date, April 3rd. First night he slept 4 hours straight without waking up coughing. There were pages and pages of clinical observations that rivaled those of professional nurses. Sophia had meticulously documented every aspect of her brother's illness, using medical terms she had learned by researching online. "Sophia," Robert said, his voice thick with admiration and disbelief, "how long have you been doing this?" "Since Miguel first got sick over a year ago," she answered, embarrassed. "I knew the doctors at the clinic didn't have time to really pay attention. So I started writing everything down so I could explain it right when I needed to." Robert continued flipping through the papers and found something even more impressive. Crude, hand-drawn graphs showing the progression of symptoms over time. Dosage calculations based on Miguel's weight, even a list of technical questions to ask the doctors. "How did you learn all this?" "The public library," Sophia said simply. "I'd use my $5 a week to research Miguel's disease. The librarian would let me stay longer when he saw I was studying something serious." Miguel smiled proudly at his sister. "Sophie's really smart. She's the one who figured out the medicine they gave me at the clinic was for regular bronchitis, not cystic fibrosis." Robert was silent for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what he was seeing. Here was an 8-year-old girl who had become, out of necessity and love, an informal expert on the disease threatening her brother, without resources, without a formal medical education, with only limited internet access and a fierce determination. "Sophia," he finally said, "have you shown these notes to Dr. Wallace?" She shook her head. "He wouldn't take it seriously. I'm just a kid." "You're wrong," Robert said firmly. "These notes are exceptional. They're more detailed than many hospital charts I've seen." At that moment, as if summoned by the conversation, Dr. Wallace entered the room for Miguel's daily checkup. Robert immediately called him over to see Sophia's notes. The doctor's reaction was immediate. His eyes widened as he flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from surprise to deep admiration. "This is extraordinary," he murmured. "Sophia, these observations are incredibly precise. You've documented patterns that take us weeks to identify in a hospital setting." Sophia blushed, unaccustomed to praise from medical authorities. "In fact," Dr. Wallace continued, "some of your observations help us better understand how Miguel is responding to the treatment. You've noted variations our equipment didn't pick up because you observe him 24/7. Robert felt a wave of paternal pride. Sophia wasn't just brave and determined, she was genuinely brilliant. Her intelligence, honed by necessity and fraternal love, had created a medical record that impressed seasoned professionals. "Princess," he said, hugging Sophia, "you're incredible. You're not just a brave girl, you're a genius." But then Sophia asked a question that completely changed the atmosphere in the room. "Mr. Robert, if I knew so much about Miguel's sickness, why do you think I asked you to buy our house?" Sophia's question hung in the air like an impending revelation. Robert looked at the girl, seeing something new in her eyes, a depth that went beyond the intelligence he had just discovered. It was as if she had been holding a secret for all these weeks, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. "Sophia," Robert said gently, "what do you mean?" She exchanged a look with Miguel, who nodded encouragingly. Dr. Wallace, sensing the gravity of the moment, stood quietly, waiting. "Mr. Robert, I researched treatments for cystic fibrosis long before I met you. I knew it cost millions of dollars. I knew our house wasn't even worth 1,000. Sophia paused, swallowing hard. "I knew you'd figure that out in the first minute." Robert felt as if the floor had shifted beneath his feet. "Then why?" "Because I didn't want your pity," Sophia said quickly, "and I didn't want you to think I was just a kid begging for a handout." Miguel tried to sit up straighter, wanting to be part of the conversation. "Tell him everything, Sophie." Sophia took a deep breath, as if preparing for a major confession. "I saw you at the gas station, and I recognized you from the magazines at the library. Robert Mendoza, the real estate king. But when you got out of the car, I saw something else." "What did you see?" "Sadness," Sophia said simply. "You were sad in the same way I get sad when I look at Miguel when he's sick. Like someone who knows what pain is." Robert felt a lump in his throat. The girl's perception was terrifyingly accurate. "So I got an idea," Sophia continued. "If I just asked for money, you would have given me some and driven away. But if I asked you to buy something, you'd have to come see it. And if you came to see Miguel, you'd see if I was the kind of person who would actually care," Robert finished, beginning to understand. "Exactly." Sophia smiled for the first time during the conversation. "I bet that if you had a good heart, you'd want to help for real once you saw what was happening. And if you didn't, at least I would have tried." Dr. Wallace was clearly impressed. "Sophia, did you manipulate this entire situation?" "I didn't manipulate," she protested. "I created an opportunity. I needed someone to see, to know our story, not just our need." Robert was silent for a long moment, processing the complexity of what had happened. An 8-year-old girl had engineered an encounter that would change all their lives, using an emotional intelligence that many adults never develop. "Did you have a plan B?" he asked, curious. Sophia looked down. "If you had left after seeing the house, I was going to keep researching. I had a list of other rich people in the city. I was going to try the same thing with each one until I found someone who cared." "But, Sophie," Miguel interjected, his voice still weak, "you said you were sure he was going to stay." "And I was." Sophia looked directly at Robert. "Because when you saw me running at the gas station, you stopped what you were doing. Most rich people don't even look at kids like us. But you stopped. You knelt down to my level and you asked real questions." Robert remembered that moment. There was something in Sophia that had immediately touched him, something that had breached his usual defenses. "And there was something else," Sophia added. "When you first saw Miguel and you thought no one was looking, you turned your face away and cried. That's when I knew you would help us." Because only someone who had already lost someone they loved would cry like that. The observation hit Robert like a lightning bolt. Sophia had noticed his moment of greatest vulnerability and had read its meaning perfectly. "Sophia," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are the smartest person I have ever met. And I'm not just talking about book smarts. You understand people. You understand feelings. You understand how the world works in a way most adults don't. I had to learn fast," she said, with a maturity that broke his heart. "When you lose your parents and have a sick brother, you don't get to be just a kid." At that moment, Robert's phone rang. It was Maria, his assistant, and her voice was strained. "Mr. Mendoza, something serious has happened. Mr. Vance got some reporters into the hospital. They're coming up to the room now, saying they're going to do a story on your suspicious activities with the children." Robert looked at Sophia and Miguel, seeing the instant fear in their eyes. Sophia had engineered a perfect meeting, created an unlikely family, but now they all faced the possibility that Arthur's lies would destroy everything they had built. "They're coming here?" Sophia asked, overhearing the conversation. "Don't worry," Robert said. But his voice carried a determination they had never heard before. "It's time to tell our real story." The reporters burst into the room like a storm, cameras and microphones invading the space that had become a sanctuary of hope. Robert instinctively moved to stand between them and the children, but Sophia did something no one expected. She rose from her chair and walked forward, placing herself at Robert's side. You came to ask questions about Mr. Robert, she asked with a calmness that stunned everyone. At 8 years old, she was facing the media with more composure than many adults. The lead reporter, a middle-aged man with a predatory expression, hadn't expected to be confronted by a child. We're investigating allegations about the nature of Mr. Mendoza's relationship with you. What kind of allegations? Sophia asked directly, showing no intimidation. Robert tried to intervene. Sophia, you don't have to... Yes, I do, she interrupted him gently, because I know why you're here. Someone lied to you about our family. The word family echoed in the room, and Robert felt his heart race. Sophia had chosen her words carefully. The reporter pressed on. Child, do you understand that there can be situations where adults take advantage of vulnerable children? Miguel, who had been watching silently, managed to sit up completely in bed. Mr. Robert didn't take advantage of us. He saved our lives. How did he save you? Sophia picked up the shoebox of medical notes she had shown Robert earlier. You want the truth? I'll tell you the whole truth. What followed was an account that left everyone in the room completely silent. Sophia told them about her parents' death, about the months spent caring for Miguel alone, about the desperate search for treatments they couldn't afford. She spoke of the day at the gas station with a clarity and honesty that was impossible to question. I chose Mr. Robert, she said, looking directly into the camera. Not the other way around. I studied, I researched, I made a plan to find someone who could truly help us. And when I found him, I discovered I wasn't just getting someone to pay for Miguel's treatment. I was getting a dad. The reporter tried to maintain his investigative tone. But can a child your age really understand? Can I understand what? Sophia cut him off. And for the first time, her voice carried an edge of irritation. Can I understand that my brother was dying? Can I understand that I was alone in the world? Can I understand that I found someone who truly loves us? Miguel joined his sister. You want to know how we know he loves us? How? The reporter asked, clearly losing control of the narrative. Because he cries when he thinks we're not watching, Miguel said simply. He cries with happiness when I feel better, and with fear when I get worse. Only someone who really loves you does that. Dr. Wallace, who had remained silent until then, decided to step in. As the physician in charge of this case, I can state categorically that Mr. Mendoza's intentions are absolutely genuine. He has not only funded an incredibly expensive treatment, but has become emotionally invested in these children's well-being in a way I rarely see. At that moment, Dr. Amanda Rice, the psychologist, arrived at the room, clearly alarmed by the media presence. What is happening here? We're clearing up a few things, Sophia said with dignity. Ma, people have spread lies about our family, and we're telling the truth. Dr. Rice glared at the reporters with professional disapproval. As the psychologist responsible for these children's evaluation, I can assure you they are in an environment of genuine love and care. Any insinuation to the contrary is not only false, but detrimental to Miguel's recovery process. The reporter, realizing the story had taken a completely different turn than he'd expected, tried one last approach. But the anonymous tips suggested... The anonymous tips, Robert finally spoke, his voice calm but firm, came from someone who wants to hurt me professionally by using these children as tools. Someone who doesn't care about Miguel's life or Sophia's well-being as long as they can destroy me. Sophia looked at Robert with an expression that mixed love, admiration, and determination. If you publish lies about my dad, she said, using the word publicly for the first time, you'll have to deal with me, and I'm a lot smarter than I look. The threat, delivered with the seriousness of a child who had faced real tragedy, had a startling impact. The reporters exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly realizing they had been manipulated into attacking a story of genuine family love. When they finally left, the room was silent for a long moment. Then Miguel started clapping with his small hands, followed by Dr. Wallace and Dr. Rice. "Sophia," Robert said, kneeling before her, "you were incredible." "We were incredible," she corrected, hugging him. "Our family is incredible." The impromptu hospital room press conference had consequences no one could have predicted. Within hours, the video of Sophia's courageous defense had spread across social media, touching hearts all over the country. The hashtag Mendoza family began trending, with thousands of people sharing the story of love born from the unlikeliest of encounters. Robert was in his office the next morning, dealing with the fallout, when Maria entered with an expression of mingled shock and joy. "Mr. Mendoza, you need to see this," she said, turning on the television. The story that was meant to destroy his reputation had turned into its complete opposite. The nation's top-rated morning show was replaying the interview, and the commentators were lavishing praise on Sophia's courage and the genuineness of their family bond. "This 8-year-old girl has taught us all a lesson in dignity and family love," the lead anchor was saying. "In a time when we are so quick to distrust one another, the story of Robert Mendoza and these children reminds us that miracles still happen." The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Newspapers wanted exclusive interviews. Television shows asked for appearances. And most importantly, ordinary people offered help, donations, and support. But it was what happened next that truly changed everything. Arthur Vance arrived at the office mid-morning, flanked by 2 lawyers. His face was tense, and Robert knew immediately that the tables had turned. "Robert," Arthur said, forgoing the usual pleasantries, "we need to talk." "About what?" "Your attempt to destroy me using sick children." Arthur flinched. "Oh, I underestimated the situation. I didn't expect this to blow up like it did." "This?" Robert stood, his voice thick with contained outrage. "You're talking about my family." "Robert, be reasonable. You have to admit your obsession with these children is affecting our business." "My obsession?" Robert laughed, a humorless sound. "Arthur, for the first time in my life, I found something more important than money. If that bothers you, that's your problem." Just then, Maria entered again, this time with a thick folder. "Mr. Mendoza, the documents you requested have arrived." Robert smiled, taking the folder. "Arthur, there's something you don't know. For the past 2 weeks, while you were plotting against me, I was investigating you." Arthur's face went pale. "I found some interesting things," Robert continued, flipping through the documents. "Like the fact that you've embezzled nearly $3 million from the company over the last 2 years, how you forged contracts and overbilled for construction materials, how you—" "Robert, wait," Arthur interrupted, panic clear in his voice. "No, Arthur, you didn't wait. You saw an opportunity to attack me when I was vulnerable, and you didn't hesitate to use 2 innocent children as your weapon." Robert stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. But you made one fatal mistake. You underestimated the power of love." At that moment, the phone rang. It was Dr. Wallace, with news that made Robert's heart soar with joy. "Robert, Miguel has responded so well to the treatment that we can discharge him next week. It's a medical miracle. He's completely stabilized." Robert closed his eyes, feeling tears of gratitude burn his eyelids. "Doctor, does that mean—" "It means he's going to have a normal life, Robert. A completely normal life." When he hung up, Robert looked at Arthur with a mixture of pity and resolve. "You tried to destroy the most precious thing in my life. Now you're going to face the consequences." 3 hours later, Arthur Vance was being escorted out by the police. Charged with corporate fraud and defamation, his financial schemes had been exposed, and he would face years of legal battles. Robert arrived at the hospital late that afternoon to find a scene that warmed his heart. Miguel was sitting up in bed, coloring a picture, while Sophia read a book aloud. They both had a look of health and happiness that contrasted starkly with the first day he'd met them. "Dad!" Sophia shouted when she saw him, running to give him a hug. The word sounded natural, as if it had always been that way. "How are my kids?" Robert asked, embracing them both. "Miguel walked to the bathroom all by himself today," Sophia announced proudly, "and I finished my first chapter book." Miguel smiled shyly. "Dad, when we get out of here, are we really going to live in your big house?" "Our house," Robert corrected. "And yes, we're going to live in our house. But first, we're going to make a few changes to it." "What kind of changes?" Sophia asked, curious. Robert smiled. Picturing the children's bedrooms he would have decorated, the playground he would build in the yard, the library he would assemble to feed Sophia's brilliant mind. The changes needed to turn an empty house into the happiest home in the world. 6 weeks had passed since that sweltering afternoon at the gas station that changed 3 lives forever. Robert parked his Mercedes in the same spot where it all began, but this time he wasn't alone. Sophia and Miguel hopped out of the car, both unrecognizable from the desperate children he had found. Miguel ran around the station's lot with boundless energy, his lungs working perfectly, with no sign of the disease that had nearly taken him. Sophia, wearing a new school uniform, carried a backpack full of books, her eyes shining with the intellectual curiosity Robert now nurtured daily. "Why are we back here, Dad?" Sophia asked, using the word that had become as natural as breathing. "To show you something special," Robert replied, pointing to where the old shack used to be. In its place, a modern, colorful building stood, the Edward Mendoza Community Health Center. Named in honor of the brother Robert had lost decades ago, the sign at the entrance read, "Dedicated to every child who deserves a second chance." "You built this?" Miguel asked, his eyes wide with awe. "We built this," Robert corrected. "With the money I would have used to buy more empty condos, we built a place where other families like ours can find help." Inside the center, a specialized medical team offered free treatment for rare childhood diseases. There was a medical research lab, a community library, and even computers where curious kids like Sophia could study and dream. Sophia ran to the library, marveling at the shelves full of books. "Dad, will all these kids be able to learn like I did?" "And so much more," Robert promised. "We'll create scholarships, mentorship programs, whatever it takes to make sure intelligence is never wasted for lack of opportunity." Mrs. Gable greeted them at the entrance, now working as the center's community coordinator. Her face beamed with pride at how the neighborhood had been transformed. "Mr. Mendoza, or should I say, Dr. Mendoza," she joked. "But 3 more families came looking for help today. The center has already served over 50 children in 1 month." Robert smiled. The local university had offered him an honorary doctorate in recognition of his social work. But the title he was proudest of was simply Dad. "How's the online fundraising campaign?" he asked. "Incredible. People from all over the world are donating. Your story has inspired a global network of similar centers. We already have projects approved for 5 more cities." Sophia came over, holding a picture she had drawn at school. It was a picture of their complete family. Robert, her, Miguel, and now also Dr. Wallace, Dr. Race, Mrs. Gable, and all the people who had become part of the extended family that grew every day. "Dad," she said, "remember when you asked me if I had a plan B in case you left that first day?" "I remember. I lied. she confessed with a mischievous smile. "I didn't have a plan B. I knew you were going to stay." "How could you have known?" Sophia hugged him tightly. "Because God wasn't going to let Miguel die after he survived so long. And God wasn't going to let you stay sad forever after you lost your brother. Sometimes He just puts the right people together at the right time to heal everyone's hearts." Robert felt tears of gratitude stream down his face. The 8-year-old girl had become his life's greatest teacher, showing him that true wealth was found in the bonds you create, the lives you touch, and the love you share. Miguel joined the hug. "Dad, when I grow up, I want to build centers like this all over the world, and I want to discover cures for all the diseases that make kids suffer," Sophia added. Robert looked at his children, because that's what they were, in every way that mattered, and saw the future shining in their eyes. A future where Sophia's intelligence would change the world, where Miguel's compassion would touch thousands of lives, where the love they had built together would multiply infinitely. "And you know something," he said, holding them with all his might. "You already have." As the sun set that evening, 3 people walked home together. Not to the isolated mansion where Robert had lived alone for so many years, but to the home they had created together, filled with laughter, books, toys, and most of all, love. The shack Sophia had offered for sale had become the seed of a miracle that was spreading across the world. Sometimes, the most unlikely offers lead to the most precious treasures. Sometimes, a house is worthless on the real estate market, but is worth everything in the market of the heart. And sometimes, when 2 brave children find a man who had forgotten how to love, families are born that change not only their own lives, but the entire world.